Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing, Thursday edition. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at SBAM. It's Thursday, as Brian said, and we always welcome our new member of the week on Thursdays. And we do this on behalf of our sponsor, Marana Group, and they're a data document and distribution company in Kalamazoo. But today we're welcoming one of our new VIP members, Safety Co. Inc., located in Warren. Safety Co. provides equipment, supplies, and training. So a big welcome to the owner, Anthony Tarquino, and his team. So Brian, let's dive into today's show. The first quarter gross domestic product report came out today, and what did we learn?
Well, it wasn't good. There was an expectation in the first quarter. Most projections were that there would be growth in the GDP, around 1.1 or 1% or 1.1% for the quarter, and it ended up coming in negative. In other words, a contraction of the GDP. This is the broadest picture of the U.S. economy. So this is looking at the sale of all goods and services. And it actually contracted during the first quarter. So that technically you're talking about recessionary type conditions. In this case, though, it really is tied to a lot of the supply chain issues where sales couldn't happen. So sometimes if the GDP contracts because demand goes down, that's harder to solve and spells trouble longer term. In this case, the demand is there, but the inability of the marketplace to do all the things necessary to meet that demand, and therefore there's the GDP contracted a little less than 2%, and so obviously not a good sign, but not a surprise either when you consider the types of challenges that you see that have arisen with respect to capitalizing on the demand that is out there today. It's really something that's showing up in most industries across the board in one way, shape, or form. And we see it now today, how broad it is to have literally caused a contraction in the overall size of the US GDP.
And one specific example would be Ford. And Ford posted a multi-billion-dollar Q1 loss. And again, this is more of a demand issue, not a demand issue, but a supply issue, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I think this is a really good high-profile indication of what's happening out there now. So when you have a huge demand for vehicles, but a supply chain that really can't put all the components together in order to deliver on that demand, that's where you get inventory building up that is not quite complete. And so when you have backlogs of months and months of orders for vehicles, they can't book those sales because the product is not delivered. And so it caused the company to show a multi-billion-dollar loss for the first quarter. Now, it's not the sort of thing that you would look at and think, oh, it's not going to, what's Ford going to do now? Well, they need to finish the vehicles and then they'll be sold, and they could have a really strong second quarter if they're able to put all these supply chain issues to bed, or at least enough of them to deliver more of the product. So what happened at the GDP level, I think, is well illustrated with a company example which put out its third quarter numbers today, in relating the supply chain woes that we're experiencing back to the contraction of the GDP.
And in other woes that businesses are experiencing, the worker shortage or finding good talent is still a challenge. And I read an interesting article from Bridge, Michigan yesterday that there is an increase in businesses, particularly those in northern Michigan, who are kind of solving a problem by buying or renting properties to help house their own workers.
Yeah, and this is, it's a strategy for certain parts of the tourism industry and agriculture that appears to be going a little more mainstream now, and that is to buy housing or have housing available for employees. So we started hearing a few years ago, actually pre-pandemic, in the Traverse City area, that that companies are having a hard time attracting in talent because there literally was not housing available for people. Certainly not affordable housing, but really across the board shortages. And so what some companies now, and there was a feature you'd mentioned in Bridge, Michigan yesterday, of companies that are literally buying spaces so that when they recruit talent, and if it's in this case, I think really talking about seasonal talent, that they've got a place for them to live. And that's a, I just, the people watching this, could you imagine your business when you're so hard up to find employees that you're buying housing for the employees that you hope to hire in the future. It just shows you how tough and difficult that problem has become. The fact that we're hearing about this in Northern Michigan, where there is kind of a history of seasonal workers and some people from downstate, younger people maybe summer from college or high school that go north for to work just for a season, but it is very clear that this is not just limited to seasonal type businesses in terms of those that are feeling that they're falling behind on their hiring, and housing being a major factor, contributor to their struggles in staffing up.
And we're going to learn more soon about the Michigan State Housing and Development Authority with a new statewide strategic housing plan. Can you talk a little bit about that yet?
MSHDA it's a state department that works on housing issues, especially affordable housing. And the chair of our board, Bill Kimball, and also myself have been engaged in the strategic planning with a lot of other interested parties in terms of moving forward and setting priorities for MSHDA in the future. So that plan will be introduced here pretty soon. We'll get somebody from MSHDA to come on here and talk through it and some of the strategies that are being developed and deployed for the future. I mentioned a few minutes ago how we first started hearing this in Northwest and West Michigan a few years back, but like a lot of the other challenges that face small business owners around the state, it's really spread across the entire landscape. The housing shortage and the impact that is having on the overall ability to attract and retain talent is affecting virtually every area in our state today.
And that's a really good segue to talk about the results of our spring survey. We actually just released those today, and I think you're going to cover a few of the highlights there.
Yeah, we ask our members quarterly how things are going, and we ask certain questions each time so that we can get a sense for trends. And we get good participation. 500 to 600 people is the usual number that participate in our surveys, including in this one. And in pretty similar findings, a lot of the challenges from a quarter ago are not any better today, according to our members. In terms of the issues that they're struggling with most, there is we see supply chain, inflation or rising costs, and difficulty in filling positions as being the top 3 issues that businesses are facing today. We asked what sorts of things are you doing to try to alleviate the shortage in employees, and about 70% have increased wages to try and attract employees. Almost half now offering more flexibility in the schedule and more remote work opportunities. Both of those things were strategies that we saw previously, but appear to be ramping up in their utilization. In terms of the overall compensation, most are reporting, the vast majority are reporting that they have, not just for the future, but have already raised wages and compensation packages. And in most, let's see, in terms of 5 to 10% and more than 10%, those 2 categories that are expecting increases like that over the next year it's the majority. I'm doing the math in my head here, 78%. So I mean, it's there's a lot that is happening right now with respect to the challenges and the strategies that small business owners are employing. But at the very end of the survey, we always ask about their confidence in the short term and the long term. And this has actually been remarkably consistent. Even though these challenges, many have become more acute over the last year, when they first started kind of showing up in significant amounts, the optimism about the future still remains quite high. And that's a good sign. I mean, when confidence starts falling, you see kind of a contraction of behaviors changing and a contraction of overall risk taking. In this case, at least based on this survey and our members, we see the optimism over the next 6 months and the optimism over the long term to both be encouraging. So the thing that I always love about this survey is that the optimism that things are gonna go well, or the prospects for the business in this next 6 months, are always lower than the long term, which I think is a mindset that business owners have, is that you have to be realistic in the short term, but over the long term, this is going to work out. And so to see that kind of consistent thread through, regardless of the challenge today, that entrepreneurial spirit is definitely alive and well. So one other thing too, that has shown up, just a little bit, a few other of the other challenges. Talk about the big three that's been consistent, but I think it's worth noting that 21% reported a declining sales trend, and I think that it's always hard to to flesh out exactly why that would be, but there's so much changing out there today in the way that things are happening, the types and ways that people are consuming goods and services. And so the idea that there are many businesses having record years, but 21% saying that declining sales trend is a challenge, and then probably not surprisingly, cash flow identified by 21%. If you got declining sales, chances are you got cash flow challenges too. So overall, I would say that it's highly consistent with what we've seen before. Still optimism over the future, but some of these problems have grown to be a bit more acute than in our last survey 3 months ago.
And I did drop a link to the press release that we issued earlier this afternoon in the chat here on Zoom, so you can take a look at it for yourselves. Okay, so Brian, there's a skating rink, I think it was in the Flushing area, that has challenged the validity of emergency power rules that were issued during the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about why now and what this could mean going forward?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting case. So you might recall that the governor's emergency powers were challenged and struck down by the Supreme Court. The emergency powers of the governor just kind of as a standalone entity. Then, as the pandemic carried on, there was a switch in reliance from that law that eventually was repealed, but also struck down by the governor or by the Supreme Court. A reliance on the public health code, which had unlimited duration emergency powers, so lesser in scope in terms of what could be curtailed, but unlimited duration. That had been challenged too, but really hadn't gotten anywhere. There's a group of businesses, but the lead is a roller skating rink, which is an entity that a type of entity that was restricted by the public health emergency powers for a very, very long time. One of the last few to have all their restrictions lifted, and so those powers are being challenged and appealed to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. This kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, there wasn't talk of an appeal to the Sixth Circuit, and that's Michigan is in the Sixth Circuit. You know, there's different circuits across the country. This one is located in Columbus, Ohio, but Michigan is part of this district, and so it's being appealed to the Sixth Circuit, and it's on the basis of the Fifth Amendment, which is due process, essentially saying that there was no due process or a way that a person could challenge their business being shut down. One other notable thing about the case is that it's the same law firm that had represented Carl Menke, who is the barber. You might recall that there was a barber that continued doing haircuts when the emergency powers had forbid that activity, and the same firm, it's a small firm, family law firm that represented him, is also representing in this case. So there's while sometimes people look at it and say, well, these small law firms, how big a difference do they make? Well, this particular one has made a pretty big difference before, so it's a pretty big move to go to the Sixth Circuit Court. We'll keep an eye on this case too, because it's even though the one part of emergency powers has been struck down, which was much broader, this, as we know from experience, that the Public Health Code has an unlimited duration ability to limit the scope of business that somebody can do under public health grounds. Well, I guess we'll see what the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has to say about that.
All right, let's cover a couple of election-related issues next. The first is a ballot initiative called Unlock 2, and they were unable to meet the first signature deadline. So what does Unlock 2 propose, and what does this missed deadline mean for the fate of this proposal?
The Michigan Constitution allows citizens to petition the government, provide a certain number of signatures, and then either put a question before the legislature, or in this case, or actually that's what this one is, to put a question before the legislature, have them either pass or reject it. If they pass it, it becomes law without the governor's signature. If they reject it, it goes to the ballot so that people can vote yes or no. And then it becomes law or not, depending on whether it passed. But it's a lot of signatures, hundreds of thousands of signatures that are required in order to meet the threshold to do this. In this case, this Unlock 2 is actually seeks to do what this lawsuit that we just talked about is seeking to do, which is to curtail the emergency powers in the Public Health Code that allowed for an unlimited duration of business limitations and closures. And so they're looking to essentially approve or get a citizen-initiated law approved. So that is, they have 90 days to collect the signatures. But if they don't collect them, they can add more days, but all the ones from the beginning fall off. So that's where they're at. Every day they add more, they lose more on the other end, and it makes it more difficult, excuse me, for it to go through.
All right, so speaking of signatures, there has been a challenge to GOP gubernatorial candidate James Craig's signature filings. What is this challenge? We talked before, you said there would be challenges, that there often are in these types of things, but what does this essentially mean going forward?
Yeah, there's actually three challenges out there. Well, 4 challenges for 3 candidates. Not surprisingly, it's the ones that are, probably the most likely to win the nomination are the ones getting challenged. This always happens. So it's some of the candidates have to be prepared to deal with. With James Craig, the challenge says that a lot of his signatures were forgeries. Now, this is a pretty serious challenge, and they're saying that there were a lot of them. Whether or not it's credible, it's impossible to see. Political parties just throw stuff against the wall, causes your opponents to spend time and money on legal stuff, and sometimes that's enough to make it worth it for them. Now, in this case, though, there is some kind of scuttlebutt around, is that, ear to the ground type stuff, where people that are in this line of business of verifying and questioning the veracity of the signatures have suggested that they think that Chief Craig is somewhat vulnerable to this challenge. So that's one of them, which may or may not be a serious challenge, but at least some people in this line of work appear to think that perhaps it is serious. Tudor Dixon, on the other hand, a candidate from the Muskegon area, turned in 29,000 signatures. That's almost the max that you're allowed to turn in. There's no chance really that they would strike down enough signatures to where it fall below 15,000. They're challenging hers based on a different criteria. They're saying that there's an error on the form itself. And so they're saying all 29,700 or whatever it was, that they're all invalid because the end date of the term is not correct. So the end date of the term is on January 1st of the next year. So like when I was in office as lieutenant governor, it was from January 1st of 2011, elected in 10, took office January 1st, 2011. My term ended on January 1st, 2019. So it didn't end in 2018 when the election was. It was noon on 2019. Tudor Dixon's forms say basically are printed to suggest that the term ends December 31st of the previous year, and it's January 1st of the next year. That's highly technical. It doesn't question the veracity of the signatures. It says the form had a technical problem. Now, is the court really going to throw out all of those signatures because of a technical problem? I hope not. And SBAM doesn't have a position on these, but the idea that it doesn't have a position on the race. Okay, we haven't endorsed any candidate. But the idea that somebody could turn in signatures and there'd be this, little technical problem that wouldn't change whether or not a person was signing under false pretenses or didn't know what they were signing. I would hope a court would not throw out on that basis. And I would suggest that there was a challenge against the governor's form, Governor Whitmer's form, which had a what they call the union bug. It's a little stamp. And a lot of Democrats, what they'll do on all their printed material is they'll put a little stamp printed on there that says this was printed at a union shop. Well, the law says that all typeface has to be of a certain size on your form. Well, that little union bug has a little tiny print on it. So technically, the governor's forms did not meet that requirement in statute, that the stamp on there had this little tiny font that was obviously smaller than the law allows. But courts, I think rightly, decided that that didn't change the substance of this form at all. Nobody would have signed differently if they could have read the little stamp better. And so they let it all stand. I think that's very similar to the challenge against Tudor Dixon. It ought to stand. The one against Perry Johnson really does look like they've kind of thrown it in because some signature collectors, a very small percentage of the signature collectors for Perry Johnson were used in were the same team that were doing some of the James Craig signatures that were being challenged. But it's such a small amount that it wouldn't, even if they wiped out all those signatures, it wouldn't affect his qualification for the ballot. So I look at all of these things. It's hard to judge on Chief Craig's challenge because they're challenging a lot of signatures. Tudor Dixon's is technical, and Perry Johnson's look like one they're just kind of throwing against the wall to see if they can, kind of distract an opponent candidate. So those are the challenges that are before. By the way, I told you there were 4 challenges on three candidates. It's the Democrats challenging these 3 that I've already talked about. So Mark Brewer, former chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, and then an attorney at Dykema that used to be essentially the chief legal officer for Jennifer Granholm. is kind of almost operated as the chief of staff for her. Those are the two that are challenging these three that I've already talked about. But Tudor Dixon, a Republican candidate, one of the ones being challenged, is also challenging James Craig's signatures. So there's one between the candidates that is being challenged as well. So all of the other, I don't know of any other challenges that have been filed. The deadline to challenge the signatures has already passed. At this point, it goes to there's a group called there's the Elections Bureau will do a review, and then they will make a recommendation to the Board of Canvassers. The Board of Canvassers are the ones that approve it at the end of the day, the signatures, and say whether or not there's enough. If they deadlock, there's 4 people. If it's 2-2, often is because there's 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, then it goes to a court. I'd be pretty surprised if a court looked at the challenge against Tudor Dixon or Perry Johnson as being credible. I don't have enough information to know for sure on Chief Craig, so I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one.
All right, definitely wait and see and report back. Before we go today, I wanted to let our viewers who might be in the Bay City or Pontiac areas know that we have upcoming owner-to-owner events. These owner-to-owner events are, just like they sound, exclusive to small business owners. So if you're interested in attending, you can visit our website, sbam.org/events. We'll be in Bay City on May 10th. And we'll be in Pontiac on May 11th. So if you're in that area, please feel free to register to attend. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you back here on Monday.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Monday.